March 1999. Disaster strikes a Philippine-based mining company, drawing the attention of Monarch's director Ishiro Serizawa, though he does not investigate this crisis alone. His second, Vivian Graham, also accompanies him, a reliable friend who he requests to interview the workers while he ventures into the highly irradiated breach. He alone will carry the risks of delving into the caves, not Graham or anyone else until proven safe. So while Serizawa descends into the radioactive pit, discovering the bones of some ancient titan, Graham interviews worker after worker, finding an individual on the edge of mania. After the collapse, another earthquake struck the mine. While most workers looked down to see if the earth would once again split open beneath them, the distressed storyteller looked to the sky, praying for salvation. Then he saw it, peering over the mountain. Graham presses the man to explain, to confide in her, and as Serizawa discovers the Muto eggs and then sees the light, uncovering the trail of destruction to the sea, the interviewee finally relents. At the nearby mountain's peak, peering down upon all in the valley, stood a giant beyond all comprehension, a living god. I don't think it's an unfair criticism to say that Godzilla 2014, the film which kicked off the MonsterVerse, while a good movie, falls short in a few key areas. Its human drama, at least once Bryan Cranston's character dies at the end of Act 1, an inability to maintain a consistent theme, and finally, keeping its titular character, Godzilla, relevant throughout the entire runtime. But what if things went differently? What kind of film would Godzilla 2014 have looked like if we tweaked these uneven elements? Well, let's explore such a story as I rewrite Godzilla 2014. To set the stage, I do want to make something abundantly clear. This video is not meant to undermine the hard work Gareth Edwards, the actors, writers, and everyone else put into Godzilla 2014. Making movies is an incredibly difficult experience, and this video is meant more as a fun exercise to complement a good film rather than a replacement for it. Take the opening sequence with Serizawa, which started this video. Originally, the point of the opening in the film is to introduce the audience to this new universe of monsters, set up a threat and mystery of the Mutos, and let the audience know that there is a covert organization specifically designated to monitor these monstrous beasts. On all these beats, the opening does its job well. However, recall our goals. Relevant to this sequence, we want to ensure that Godzilla is more prominent throughout the story and help flesh out the human characters. Godzilla leering over a nearby mountain isn't just a nod to the 1954 scene. It provides another layer to the mystery, shows Godzilla as an active character immediately responding to the parasite's awakening, and most importantly, helps distinguish Graham and Serizawa's personalities, because each member of Monarch essentially fills the same role of expelling exposition to the rest of the cast. But here, from the outset of the rewrite, we can show off what makes these two similar characters distinct. Graham's more social and outgoing, connecting with those that have suffered, while Serizawa delves into the darkness alone, ensuring the risks of the hidden world impact as few people as possible. Each are attempting to piece together what is going on, yet no matter their intentions or ways about doing things, they cannot stop the tragedy about to unfold. Now, the destruction of Janjira and a lot of what follows, I think, is where this movie really shines, where the characters' motivations, actions, and dialogue is the strongest throughout the entirety of the film. So it won't come as much as a surprise when I say I won't be changing much of this opening third. Well, except for one thing. Instead of having Joe Brody close the door, sealing Sandra Brody along with the radioactive fallout, he simply arrives too late. He finds the doors have automatically closed, that his wife is on the other side, that there is still time only for the radioactive mist to reach her and her co-workers, dooming Sandra. Thus, over the next 15 years, the guilt which plagues Joe isn't just the loss of his wife, but a hatred in himself for not doing enough. Because if he had just run faster, been stronger, somehow opened the door, somehow managed to exert more control over the situation, the love of his life wouldn't be entombed in a coffin of concrete and steel. Fast forward to 2014, where we meet the adult Ford Brody, his wife Elle, and their young son Sam, living comfortably in San Francisco. When Ford receives news of his father's arrest in Japan for trespassing in the Janjira quarantine zone, he's reluctant to go and get his father out of jail. Only when Elle convinces him it's the right thing to do, does Ford cross the Pacific to free the shadow of what was once a man he respected. But despite years of dismissing Joe's conspiracies, the young man's love of his father and own reservations of what happened that fateful day 15 years prior, not to mention a flurry of demands from Joe, convinces Ford to go to Janjira to recover the data Joe says exists in their home that will prove the woman each of them loved did not die of a natural disaster, but by something else. The pair recover the data, yet are captured by Monarch and taken to Janjira's nuclear reactor. Though in part to the soldiers ensuring they follow Serizawa's guidelines, Ford and Joe do not get a great view of what now lurks at the heart of the facility. Joe's data is confiscated and reviewed by Serizawa and Graham, both of whom realize it relates to the ongoing crisis involving the parasite. Graham recommends letting Ford and Joe know what is going on, to unveil the truth to them in the hope that they may be able to solve the unfolding crisis. But Serizawa just outright rejects this idea. Instead, he orders the men taken to the mainland, an order never to be carried out. The Muto bursts from its chrysalis. Alarms blare, personnel scatter, and Janjira's restored structures begin to crumble, inadvertently creating an opportunity for Ford and Joe to escape their incarceration. Through billowing smoke and falling debris, the pair race to escape with their lives. Joe spots Serizawa and Graham for a fleeting moment amidst the chaos, before his attention shifts to his son, when a piece of metal smashes against Ford's skull. As the young man's consciousness flickers and Joe drags him to a nearby vehicle, Ford watches the Muto take flight, watches the beast descend into the heavens, and in the distance, spots a dorsal-plated silhouette against a storm-filled horizon, ending Act 1. So you probably have a few questions, but at least for now, I'm only going to answer one of them, which is why keep Joe alive? Contrary to what you might think, Joe living through the Muto's awakening isn't because he was done dirty or he is a good character. Why I've opted to keep him alive is because his survival is essential to Ford's character. Despite what you think of Aaron Taylor Johnson as an actor, the complaint of his wooden performance, I'd argue, should not entirely fall at the actor's feet, but more importantly, the script. At his core, Ford Brody is a reactive character, someone constantly pushed and pulled by people and monsters throughout his life, a man that is just never in control. His wife tells him to help his dad, so he goes. His father tells him to accompany him to Janjira, so he agrees. His profession even reflects this trait, with him quite literally being a soldier, someone whose main job is taking and completing orders given to him by others. Meanwhile, Joe Brody is Ford's opposite, an active character pushing the plot forward, pushing his son to help him uncover what the monster is that killed his wife and the organization that covered up Sandra's death. So in conclusion, keeping Joe Brody around isn't to raise the movie's potential with more Bryan Cranston. It's a way to bring about the maximum potential of Ford Brody, a man who more often than not relinquishes control over his life to others after witnessing a horror in his youth he could do nothing to stop. I personally believe emphasizing this trait of Ford Brody would give Aaron Taylor Johnson more opportunities to shine, and in my opinion give more depth to a seemingly shallow character. Act 2. Act 2 opens with Ford's eyes fluttering open to the drone of jet engines. Joe confronts his son and explains he recognized Ishiro Serizawa as a ghost, a phantom who appears and vanishes without a trace when supposed natural disasters strike. But thanks to the network of contacts he's created over the past decade, Joe knows the man is flying east toward the United States. If things go to plan, they can intercept him on Hawaii. They can finally uncover the truth about what really happened to Sandra. Ford naturally hesitates, wishing to return to the States, to be at his wife's side after witnessing a giant monster break free from Janjira. Joe isn't fazed by any of this, however, and he assures his son he's already contacted his wife, that the only way to be truly safe is by uncovering the secrets of Monarch. So Ford once again agrees, helping his father infiltrate the local airport, only for the Muto to upend their plans. Chaos spreads like a wildfire. Ford is caught at the center of the unfolding disaster, but despite the monster's arrival, sheer determination compels Joe to track down Serizawa and Graham. At gunpoint, Joe levels question after question at Serizawa, merely for the director to remain silent. But luckily for Serizawa, Graham is more than willing to unveil the truth to save her boss's life. So instead of the aircraft carrier scene where Ford Brody is filled in on Godzilla, the Titans, and the MonsterVerse at large, because Serizawa feels bad about his dad dying, here, Joe and the audience receive some of the answers we've been searching for, interspliced with Ford's increasingly desperate fight for survival and fight to save those around him. That is, until Alpha and Parasite clash. Joe flees, and as the Muto retreats after the short battle, an unsettling peace returns to Hawaii. After saving the small boy within the airport tram, albeit with the kid suffering a few injuries in this version of the story, Ford helps reunite the separated family. Though, unlike in the original timeline, the injuries spur the father to berate Ford, the father claiming that Ford could have done more, he could have prevented his son from suffering at all. We, as the audience, know this is untrue. Ford did everything he could, and the fact that two of them are still alive is nothing short of a miracle. But the father's anger here is needed to tie back to the central theme of the story, that there was nothing to be done. The situation was beyond Ford, beyond anyone's ability to control. Ford stresses this fact, but it falls on deaf ears. When given the chance to turn Ford over to Monarch soldiers, the distraught father does not hesitate. Ford is detained, placed within a brig within the aircraft carrier. His only visitors, the two people his father held at gunpoint. Graham, who is now suffering a bad leg injury after the attack at the airport, and Serizawa, both of which are still attempting to piece together Joe's notes and need the young man's help. On the condition that he be set free to return to his wife and child, Ford agrees to tell them everything he knows. Most importantly, that the Muto was speaking to something else. Serizawa and Graham essentially exchange knowing glances. This is something they know and have been tracking since Godzilla first surfaced in the Philippines, and at Janjira, and now Hawaii. Until tonight, they had theorized Godzilla was responding to the Muto's calls. But after witnessing the violent confrontation in Hawaii, they now believe he was actually hunting the parasite. That Janjira's radiation acted as not only a food source for the parasite, but a veil, camouflaging the beast until it was fully grown. Ford then reveals that his father was certain the Muto was communicating with something like itself, that the Muto was signaling another member of its kind, and that certainty finally piques the pair's curiosity. A Monarch team is sent to investigate the Yucca mountain range, but unlike the film, there is no massive, obvious breach on the side of the mountain. Instead, everything appears normal. Sure, the area's had a few earthquakes, but the aftershocks have gotten progressively smaller, so nothing to worry about, right? Well, no. In fact, when they enter the Muto's egg room, they find a massive hole down into the base of the mountain. Earthquakes continue to tear through Nevada. Planes crash to the earth from the subterranean creature's constant electromagnetic pulse. And as the male unexpectedly appears in San Francisco, there is no doubt where this monstrous burrowing Muto is headed. Ellie and Sam find themselves trapped within the city, a city placed under even greater threat as the military's plan backfires. The nuclear warhead meant to draw the Mutos and Godzilla offshore now sits on a countdown sequence in the heart of San Francisco. Ford, terrified for those he loves, now finds himself drafted into a special military operation to disarm the bomb. There is no other specialist in close proximity to disarm the device. If Ford doesn't go, If he doesn't stop the clock, his family and everyone else in San Francisco will be caught up in a new nuclear disaster, ending Act 2. But before we dive into Act 3, I feel an explanation is needed to explain why I made the changes I did to the original story. For starters, Godzilla's inclusion at Janjira and longer fight in Hawaii help ingrain him as an essential player within the ongoing story. At Janjira, Godzilla's brief appearance affirms he and the Muto are connected, and in hindsight, a threat the Alpha was attempting to stop before things spiraled out of control. The Hawaii fight would thus serve to showcase not only Godzilla's might, but also establish that if Godzilla did not intervene, how far Joe would have gone to get answers from Serizawa, allowing the Muto to take another member of his family for a pursuit which has engrossed the man over the past 15 years. Speaking of Joe, his confrontation with Serizawa would not only give Bryan Cranston the ability to act against and equal in Ken Watanabe, something that did not occur in the original film, but also reveal what drives these two men. Each are doing what they think is best for the world, yet neither of them can see the flaws in the other's approach. One attempting to free the truth no matter the cost, the other attempting to shield mankind from said truth, believing that such knowledge will only cause chaos and suffering. In this sense, both men failing to realize the consequences of their extreme actions. Dramatic confrontations aside, you've likely also noticed the absence of several significant sequences from the original film's second act. Ford's journey back to the United States, Ford's encounter with the female Muto, Sam and Elle's scenes involving the chaotic evacuation of San Francisco. These were removed primarily due to pacing and narrative irrelevance. No other cast member fills the hole left by Joe Brody, and without some immediate threat or pressure, Ford's scenes alone in the original film feel exceptionally hollow. Scenes like his counter with the female on the bridge that, while visually distinct, don't really amount to any payoff later down the line, except maybe a single glare from the female Muto. Ultimately, each of these sequences could be removed from the original film and nothing substantial would be lost. In fact, it would just help the pacing of the film and shorten the bloated second act. Elle's scene by contrast suffer because they failed to properly mirror that of Sandra Brody. Each are women doing their best despite the nuclear threats each face. Yet despite this, for the rest of the climax, Elle isn't located at the hospital, battling to save those which were left behind in the evacuation. She's attempting to survive just like everyone else in the city, which ultimately begs the question, why keep her in San Francisco if there is nothing distinct about her character doing so? Here, the hastened threat and keeping her at the hospital fixes not only her motivation and following actions, but places further pressure upon all the characters involved. Ford remains on the aircraft carrier, constantly thrown from crisis to crisis without respite or knowledge that his family is okay. By this point in the story, Aaron Taylor Johnson's performance should be going from the reserved performance we saw in the original film to a man cracking under the pressure of all his fears and worries because he doesn't know if his family is safe. Meanwhile, Elizabeth Olsen's character faces the monstrous mayhem not by choice, but without warning. Yet despite this, and in contrast to those who immediately flee for their own well-being, she stays and attempts to help those under her care, to help keep them alive. This includes her son, which, speaking of, Sam in this version isn't evacuated safely out of San Francisco. He remains trapped in the city, stuck in the same situation Elle is in. And on one final note, by having the female Muto tunnel her way to San Francisco and emerge dramatically through the smoke beside her mate right before the third act, her arrival would mark the final reveal to the mystery that began with the male's devastating attack on Janjira. The audience would now understand everyone's motivations, understand the stakes now at play. The Mutos are reunited, the nuke is primed, every character exactly where they need to be or quickly approaching the city. And with the mystery fully concluded, the final act can now begin. Apologies for the interruption, but by far most of you are not subscribed.
To stay up to date with these future releases, please consider doing so, or at the very least, leaving a like. Thank you.
Act 3. And begin Act 3 does with a demand heard by Serizawa, Graham, and every other higher-ranking member of the military like Admiral Stenz. Ford will join the mission into San Francisco, though he has a single stipulation. A team must be sent into the city to retrieve his wife and child just in case his mission doesn't succeed. And to his shock, his demand is declined. See, without an early evacuation, the Bay Area's 7 million residents are all attempting to evacuate themselves, clogging every way in and out of the city. Monarch, military, and civilian assets are all stretched to their absolute breaking point. There are no available reserves, and it's here that all the pressure, pain, and actions over the past few days finally causes Ford to break. He essentially asserts that he will get his family out of the city one way or another. What those around him are actually deciding is if they will allow the nuclear weapon to detonate. A not so subtle threat that if he is dropped in San Francisco, Ford won't be controlled. His actions are entirely of his own decision, because despite the natural disaster occurring around him, Ford can still control the actions of himself and decide what he will do with the limited time he has before the nuke goes off. You can imagine such reckless disregard for orders would not be taken kindly, especially by Admiral Stenz. However, before Ford can feel such repercussions, Ishiro Serizawa volunteers. Like his journey into Dagon's tomb or the secrecy he ensured Monarch follows over the past few decades, Serizawa is a character who preferred himself to carry the costs of a Titan-filled world rather than burden others. Even in Godzilla King of the Monsters, when able to technically order anyone else to go to carry the nuke to Godzilla, he accepts the suicide mission to supercharge Godzilla. This choice to help Ford would be no exception to that pattern. And while an injured Graham may protest his actions, she knows that she can't take his place. So as Ford prepares for his mission, Serizawa is given the soldier's home address and where Elle works and sets out to find her. So instead of Sam Brody crossing the Golden Gate Bridge to escape the monstrous clash about to occur, the sequence would follow Serizawa's frantic attempt to cross the bridge, an effort made just in the nick of time as the entire structure collapses. Things thus return to the original timeline. The male Muto intercepts the Leviathan, and while the parasite can slow the Titan down, it is time the female needs to create her nest and for Ford to descend from on high. Cut to Serizawa, entering the familiar residence of the Brodies. No one really responds to his calls, yet the click of a gun alerts Ishiro that he is very much not alone. From the shadows, Joe Brody emerges. After evading Monarch in Hawaii, Joe immediately came to San Francisco to ensure his daughter-in-law and child were safe from the Mutos, merely to find their home empty. That is, until Serizawa arrived. And unlike their heated exchange in Hawaii, this exchange between the two men would be filled with an unspoken dread. Joe just has one single demand for the head of Monarch: to know why he wasn't warned about the Muto 15 years prior. He laments that if he knew, things could have been different. Lives could have been saved. Serizawa disagrees though, noting that no one, not even himself, knew where the Muto was headed. If he told mankind, panic and chaos would have killed far more that day than just the man's wife and colleagues. Joe, though, hears none of this and immediately claims that is pure arrogance. Serizawa, though, disagrees. Despite being the head of Monarch, Serizawa assures Joe that there is not a day that he believes himself in control of the gods that he knows exists on the planet. Only the truly arrogant believe that they can control nature and the disasters which follow. Joe's knuckles whiten around the gun grip, clearly furious, but before he can pull the trigger, Serizawa gestures toward the family photos lining the hallway. He points out why he is there. Because like Joe, Serizawa came to the Brody residence to get the family out of San Francisco, and he knows where they might be. So when he mentions that and the fact of the military's nuclear fumble, Joe's fury dissolves into clarity. Joe's decade-long absence has left him a stranger to his own family's lives. The bitter irony isn't lost on him. His obsession with uncovering the truth has left him ignorant of information critical to saving them when it matters most. That information being where his daughter-in-law works. Now, Brody Sr. has a pretty obvious choice right now. He can take revenge, or whatever shred of revenge he can get, on Serizawa, or he can join the man in helping save his grandchild and daughter-in-law. The answer he decides without hesitation. Joe lowers the gun. No words pass between the two men, just a nod of understanding. Their shared destination, the hospital where Ellie Brody works. At this point, the story returns to its original trajectory. The female Muto may have received a more menacing introduction in this rewrite, but I would maintain the moment where Godzilla effortlessly overpowers her. It's a great subversion to the buildup of the female, and something I definitely would keep. Likewise, Ford's infiltration of the nest, removal of the nuclear payload, and the explosion he creates I'd also keep, with one exception. Despite Ford's noble intentions and his desire to become a more active role against the chaos around him, I'd have a few of the little pre-developed Muta larvae survive and go berserk, essentially attacking anything they can find, including Ford and his men. This would once again tie nicely back to the theme of control, with man attempting and failing to overpower nature. What this failure would also do is give Ford and the soldiers an easy win as they kill a few of the escaping parasites. Not all of them though, as this ties the A plot here with the C plot of Ishiro and Joe. The pair of men have found Ellie, but with things seemingly devolving citywide, the risk of leaving the way they came is just far too great. With this limited amount of time, Joe comes up with a new plan. See, Joe grew up in San Francisco, and he studied at a nearby university to the hospital, one which houses an underground lab which was once built out of a nuclear shelter. The reason why it was done this way is because it's a place that conducted radioactive experiments, which means that it had to be shielded, a place where they would survive the detonation of a high-yield nuclear weapon, but not die from radiation poisoning. Elle agrees, ready to inform everyone else in the hospital, but Joe catches her arm, noting that there's not that much space, that they can't fit hundreds of people into this lab. At which point, Elle just responds there are only a few dozen or so left in the building, and she goes to get them. And as Elle hurries away to gather everyone else inside the hospital, including Sam, Joe stands frozen, the weight of his hypocrisy sinking in like a certain reptile's foot upon the female Muto. Reason why is, on instinct, Joe would have kept the truth from others to ensure his own family's survival, the very thing he'd fought the better part of 15 years to undo. While Joe still despises Serizawa, he can now kind of understand the man's actions just that much more. Anyway, the group navigates the chaos of battling titans to reach the university, just blocks away from the hospital. As they approach the entrance though, a wounded Muto larva detects their movement and skitters toward them. Vowing not to allow one of these things to take another life, Joe seals the door to the university, ensuring those on the other side will be safe. An action which should resonate especially with Serizawa, a man who delves into the unknown, who accepts the risks of the monstrous world so not to place that fear and risk into others, is now experiencing the opposite. He's sealed off from the world of monsters, trapped not alone but with dozens of others, unable to know the truth of what is going on because another desired him to be safe. If there is a line of dialogue or a bit of self-reflection to be had by Serizawa, it would be at this precise moment. Back to Joe, the scientist runs like he did all those years ago. Yet unlike then, he uses everything at his disposal to stop the living shadow of his past. But despite the weapon he holds, his unrelenting persistence, or the cunning he displays like dropping rubble on the larva, nothing works. This small titan can't be stopped. So lying on the ground, Joe must contend with the lack of control, finally confronting the fact he couldn't do anything for his wife in the past, and there isn't anything he could do for himself now. But unlike 15 years ago, Joe isn't alone. Massive claws cleave through the juvenile Muto. Joe looks up, staring eye to eye with that of Godzilla, before each are swallowed in a veil of dust, leaving Joe's future uncertain. The scene shifts to Ford, who, after successfully transporting the nuclear device onto a ship, currently stares into the fury-filled glare of the female Muto. However, Ford does not aim his gun toward the monster. Instead, he drops the weapon, relinquishing any notion that he can control what will surely happen. A bullet will not stop the female, nor any other action he makes. So with what time he has left, Ford opts to look at a family photograph one last time, hoping his family will live to see another day, even if he won't. Of course, Godzilla intervenes. Ford is rescued, balance is restored, and the nuke goes off. Unlike in the film though, the weapon detonates within the harbor, most likely right underneath what's left of the, San Francisco's Golden Gate Bridge. And if this is indeed a larger weapon or nuclear weapon than what was used at Castle Bravo against Godzilla, as inferred by the film, then unparalleled destruction follows in the blast's wake. Time passes for Sarazella and Elle, yet it's with a beating at the lab's door which draws their attention. Joe survived, now signaling the group to exit. The group follow through and find Joe with a Geiger counter, the meter unable to detect anything. Sarazella doesn't need to ask how, he can clearly see why. Past Elle's hospital, which is now nothing but rubble, Godzilla lays motionless. The Titan isn't dead, just resting, absorbing all the radiation the nuke unleashed, starving any Muto larvae which are still alive, and allowing rescue efforts to happen all over the ruined city. And so the story concludes, with the Brody family embracing one another and a living force of nature having brought balance to the world, slipping beneath the ocean surface, leaving only ripples in its wake, concluding this rewrite. I hope you all enjoyed this retelling of Godzilla 2014. And if you would like to see a similar style scenario continuing into Godzilla King of the Monsters, with all the changes of this scenario continuing into that one, let me know in the comments down below. Though I would be amiss if I didn't shout out the awesome Evolve Titan members that make stuff like this possible for you to enjoy. That includes the likes of Os Eternity, Bernard Rubin, Forgay Steve, Claire, the Sad Beast King, Anime Mothman, the Cosmonaut, the Australian Nerd, Road Does Stuff, Miles Y, Greyshot Productions, Calamity Spino, Not Toe Sweet, and last but not least, Infinite. As always, I'm Greyshot151, and I'll see you all next time. Until then, later.